Moshe Mendel Najdorf was born in Warsaw, and he was a pupil of Savieli Tartakover. Najdorf was born April 15, 1910. He passed away July 4th, 1997, 87 years of age. Now, at the age of 20, Najdorf became Polish national master, and he played for Poland in the chess Olympiads of 1935, 1937, and 1939. And it was at the Buenos Aires Olympiad in 1939 when World War II broke out, and Najdorf exercised the better part of valor and stayed in Argentina, deciding not to attempt to return home, which probably saved his life because his family members all died in German concentration camps. Now, in 1950, he was one of the 27 players to be awarded the first official standardized Grandmaster title. In 1943, Najdorf set the record for simultaneous games played, playing 202, scoring 182 wins, 8 losses, and 12 draws. In 1947, he played 45 games simultaneously, blindfolded, setting a record at the time. 39 wins, 2 losses, 4 draws. In the late 30s and 40s, he established himself as one of the world's best players. He won Budapest 1936, Buenos Aires 1939, Buenos Aires Circulo 1941, Mar del Plata 42 and 43 and 44 and 46. He was quite dominant at Mar del Plata. Oh, and 47. He won at Prague in 46 as well as Rio de Janeiro in 46. He won in Venice in 1948. Najdorf was a profound theorist and contributed many opening ideas, notably one of the most popular openings of all time, of course, the Najdorf variation in the Sicilian defense. Najdorf was a strong contender to be included in the FIDE World Championship tournament since he had won at Prague, but he was excluded. He should have been included, but he was not invited. He was ranked number 2 in the world at the time, and so it seems quite unfair that he was excluded from the World Championship tournament, even from the very first time that FIDE got their hands on the World Championship. Conspiracy and corruption was present. No surprise there. All right, let's get into the game and see how it unfolded. Of course, Bobby beginning with E4. Best by test, no surprise. Okay, we have C5, the Sicilian defense, knight F3, D6, D4, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. Of course, by now you know this is the open variation. Knight F6, knight C3, E6. Now, let's back up for a moment. This is the French variation, played by Miguel Najdorf, the French variation. You might expect Najdorf to play Najdorf's variation, which is A6. But probably he would have been obviously known by that now, and so he doesn't want people to catch him in his own opening preparation. So he must have switched things up. E6, the French variation, is played. Now G4 is Palkeris's attack. Palkeris was the Estonian grandmaster who is probably in contention for the greatest chess player in history not to become world champion. How'd you like to have that notoriety? A6 now is played, a move later. G5 hits the knight, and so the king's knight comes to D7. Bishop E3, pawn B5. Pawn A3, stopping pawn from coming to B4. Bishop B7. And now Bobby with Queen D2. That marked inaccurate. The book move, Volume B, Section 80 of your Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, H4. The most common reply to that is Knight C6. Bobby, Queen to D2. Will he castle queenside? Looks like that's what's on his mind, especially with this bishop looking to the king's side. Bishop E7, pawn H4, knight C5, pawn F3, and now queen C7. That is marked inaccurate. And as you can see, the move recommended is knight c6. I personally would have preferred to get my king to safety and castle right here. We get a star for that idea. The bot calling for knight c6. Najdorf playing queen c7, and Bobby queenside castles as expected. Queen's knight d7, and bishop takes pawn on b5. That's marked as a mistake. King b1 called for. I thought h5 with the idea of playing g6 at the right moment. Bobby takes the pawn on b5 with his bishop. Pawn takes the bishop, and king's knight takes the pawn, hits the queen. Queen comes to c6, and knight takes the d pawn. So that's 3 pawns for a piece. That comes with check. Bishop takes the knight, and queen takes the bishop. And quite a surprising queenside castle here, marked as a blunder. The bot saying keep that king in the center and play rook c8. Right here. And once this queen is no longer controlling f8, you can still kingside castle at some point. Furthermore, you have this battery aiming down at the white king, and you're supporting the knight here on c5 with extra oomph. All right, so queenside castles was played. Queen takes the queen. And I'm not sure if this can justly be called an inaccuracy. Look at the eval bar after all. What's it calling for? Hold on. Queen e7. Okay. Queen e7 called for. I was actually wondering about queen g3 with the idea of rook d6. I'm also inaccurate, apparently. Well, I guess he could play e5 to interfere with the defense so that rook d6 could not be played. So I just lift my rook 1 square and double my rooks on the open d file. Let's say king's rook e8, king's rook d1. Okay, that gets a star. And the eval bar says I'm good. Bobby trades queens, and bishop takes the queen. Pawn b4, knight a4. Rook to d6 here. King to c7 defends. Rook takes the bishop anyway, and scores a double exclam from the annotator. King takes rook. Yes, of course. It just dawned on me. The bishop's defending the knight. Remove the defender and pick up the knight. Rook to a8, knight back to c3. King can come here at the right moment. In fact, after rook takes pawn, he does play king to b2. Najdorf doubles his rooks on the open a file, now f4, and that's going to keep this knight off of the e5 square. So knight b6, bishop takes the knight, king takes the bishop, and you get a rook knight against 2 rook endgame. Rook d1 here, rook a3 to a7, rook d6 check, king b7, pawn h5 right here, h6, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, f5. Rook e8, marked inaccurate, pawn takes pawn being called for right here. And you can still play rook e8 if white is foolish enough to push the pawn. He'll probably capture, he should capture, in which case I actually prefer sliding my rook to this open file. Couple of choices for that rook. But if white pushes, then of course rook e8. Najdorf with rook e8 here. Knight b5, rook a4, pawn c3 defends. Now pawn takes pawn on f5. And you could probably have also redoubled your rooks this way. No, it's marked inaccurate. Pawn takes pawn was played. Rook f6. Don't play pawn takes pawn here. That would not be the best. After rook e2 check, king b3, rook a6. So, Bobby, of course, playing the correct move. By the way, I think he could have also taken this pawn. This is actually the move I had my eye on. Bobby played rook f6, getting a star. What do we get for rook takes pawn? We get a star too. And the point is I've created a pass pawn, haven't I? So he probably would play rook e6 here. But now I have the juicy, this is x-ray defended, so I could actually play knight d6 check. And then I'm picking up the f-man here, the f5 guy. Let's say king c7. Boom. You don't want to play rook takes rook here. Yeah, that's a mistake. After takes, takes, takes. And the eval bar says black is equal. Bobby with rook f6. Rook e7. By the way, don't play rook takes pawn here. On rook takes pawn, you see it. Forkosaurus Rex, baby. Ha 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 ha. Bye-bye, rookie. I'll eat you like a cookie. Oh, yeah. The way we resolve this pass pawn, we just grab this first, and then after king d6, stopping us from playing here, we can actually gift check here, and on king e5, pick up this pawn. On pawn e3, we go up to the top so that we can skewer the king and the pawn if he pushes to e2. For that reason, he'd have to play king to f4. We rook e8 anyway, and the king has to escort the pawn, but now we have a pawn of our own that is nearing the promotion square. So black has to prevent that, and guess what? We've got other pass pawns to push too. Oh, yeah. Let's go back. For that reason, black does not want to grab this e-man. Instead, rook e7, knight d6 check, king b8, and e takes f5. You don't want to play knight takes pawn. Might look good because you're hitting the rook and you're hitting this pawn, but after rook takes e4 here, and rook takes h6, and rook f4, hitting the knight, well, we can throw a check here, but after king to c7, you have to retreat your rook to f6 to protect the knight. And look at the eval bar. So e takes f5 is the right way to play. Rook a6, trying to get cute here. The bot says play king c7 first. And the point of king c7 is so that you can slide your king over to d7. But look at the eval bar. We're just going to take this pawn, I think, and we have the game well in hand. Rook a6 was played, and Bobby plays rook takes h6. Marked with a mistake. Oh my. Well, he's aiming for b5, but apparently he should have played b5 to begin with. Just play b5 right here, hitting that rook. It makes sense, doesn't it? Rook takes the pawn was played. King c7, super attacking the knight. Rook b6 called for. That's going to be answered by knight takes f7 here as well, because that covers the rook. And it's a knight and 4 pawns against a rook. Najdorf with king c7, Bobby with knight b5, knight e8 being preferred. We have this discovered attack on the rook either way, but apparently knight e8 is more deadly. Let's see if we can figure out why. Knight e8, king's got to defend. If I take with the rook, he takes with the king. My knight comes to safety on f6. I guess the rook isn't strong enough to stop everything, is the point. After check, he has to get behind this h-man, but my king's going to work its way up with these 2 pawns to find victory, so it seems. Knight b5 was Bobby's choice. This was move 38. Very likely that they were rushing and short on time. King b7 to defend the rook. Knight back to d6. King back to c7. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say he should play knight e8 here. But of course he repeated and got the repeat inaccuracy. King back to b7. And here rook h7 was played. So apparently Bobby missed a winning opportunity. Although the eval bar still gives him an advantage, it's not nearly the advantage he has in this position that we showed earlier. The eval bar is giving him a full 3-point advantage here. So king b7, rook h7, rook f6, knight d4, defending the pawn, rook e4, king c2, rook e3, king b3, rook back to e4, rook h8, rook h4, rook to e8, rook takes h5 right here, rook e7 check, king c8, king c4. His objective is the same, isn't it? He needs to work the king and its 2 pawns as a unit up the board. Rook h3 is played right here, pawn b5, rook g3, king d8 attacking the rook being called for. On king d8, we'll just slide our rook way over here and get a check mark. Rook b7 better? I don't know why you'd want to block your pawn, but okay. Rook g3 was played, and now a big, huge blunder from Bobby Fischer. A rare blunder from Bobby Fischer. He plays knight to c6, double question mark. Now, you'll note that the bot tells us he should be playing king b4. And get this unit marching up the board. c4, king c5, pawn b6, king b5, pawn c5, as a unit, etc. So Bobby, not playing that, played knight c6, and rook takes the pawn on f5. Do not play the empty check here. Let me show you a pretty easy blunder for black to make is rook g4. After all, it's check. Did you win your game? No, coach, but I got him in check. Well, the problem is now king c5, and on rook takes pawn check, king b6. Do you notice that you have a Vukovic type of setup here? Get the rook safely played to c7, and it is checkmate. And because checkmate is threatened, black has to decoy this king away from the defense of c7. Right? Let's do a blunder, and this is checkmate. So for that reason, black would have to sacrifice his rook for this pawn, decoying the king away. And that's only going to now delay the inevitable because white's advantage is insurmountable. So rook g4, not a good move. Just because you can gift check doesn't mean you must gift check. Rook takes f5, the correct move from Miguel Najdorf. Knight a7 check. Now, I didn't know if king b4 here might be stronger. The bot gives this a star. But, yeah, I guess if king b4, he can just take this pawn. I do get a star, but I think he can just now draw by taking this pawn. And then you get the next pawn, and that's going to be drawn. I can fork here, yes, but the king can come over. And if you take me, I take you. Or if you don't take me, if you run away, I just run away. Doesn't matter where, I guess. So, and obviously, if takes, and that's a draw. So, knight a7 check, king d8, knight c6 check, king back to c8, rook e4. It's calling for knight d4. And clearly, if I play king b4, you get the exact same line that I just showed as before. You get the same exact thing. But rook e4, king c7, knight d4, hitting the rook, rook f1, and take a look at this position. Notice the pawn on b5, king on c4, pawn on c3, knight on d4, rook on e4, king up here on c7. Notice that, because I'm going to put that picture back up. The picture on the screen is this exact moment in the game. And you can tell both from the display board and the actual board on the table. You can see on the table the grouping of the pawns, the king, the knight, and the rook. You can see the pawn on the table there on f7 and the king there on c7. And looking now at the display board behind Najdorf, you can see part of that as well, that you have the pawn there on c3, king on c4, and pawn on b5, with the opponent's king on c7 and pawn on f7. And he's obstructing the other pieces, his body is. So I just thought it was a fun picture because here we are at that exact moment in the game. And Bobby Fischer played rook to e7 check, king b6, rook d7, rook c1, super attacking the c-man here. Rook d6 check, king b7, knight e2, forks and defends. But how does he get out of this fork? Beautiful technique. You just give a check, and white has to spend a tempo getting out of check, allowing you to get your other rook to safety. Well, Bobby interposed. Najdorf put the rook right back where it was, inviting a repetition, and so they just agreed to the draw. So Bobby let one slip in this game. Kind of too bad for him, because he was really in a strong position. Let's look at the numbers. 92.3 accuracy for Fischer, 93.2 accuracy for Miguel Najdorf, 2750 single game rating for Fischer, 2800 single game rating for Najdorf. Quite a game.